So we have political spectrum. Where are you? And so what we're going to try to look at today is to actually try to figure out, how your beliefs um, affect like your place on the political spectrum. And we'll kind of discuss what the political spectrum is. But where are you? Now, some of the things that we need to kind of understand is what you believe in, these certain like factors or certain beliefs will kind of place you on the spectrum, and we'll talk just a second about spectrum. But for example, what's your belief about the role of the church? Should the church be very active in society? Should it be up to individual participation? How about foreign policy? Should the U.S. be actively involved with countries that may sponsor terrorism, or should we not? Foreign trade, should we open up and allow unlimited trade with the United States, or should we kind of protect the industries that we have at home? And you can go through all of these, and I'm not going to touch upon all of them, but clearly, where you answer any one of those kind of questions places you on what's called a spectrum. Now, where have you seen spectrums before? Um, there's a light spectrum. If you've taken art, you know that there's a color spectrum. In chemistry, there's like an alkalinity spectrum. So a spectrum is kind of a line. It's a way to kind of measure, um, you know, like a transition between whether it's darker to lighter or taller to shorter or whatever the measurement is. In this case, when we talk about politics or political spectrum, we're really talking about two poles here. And on one side, we have what's considered left. Another term is liberal. And on the right, we have right or conservative. So what I'd like to do is kind of go through a couple of, the things like what do liberals tend to believe? What do conservatives tend to believe? Now, and where you end up somewhere on this spectrum, you could be extremely conservative or you could just be kind of moderately conservative. You can be extremely liberal or you can just be, you know, partially liberal or just a little bit liberal. So it really depends upon the issue. First of all, let's start off with liberals here, and I'll probably jump back and forth. Liberals look for change. Liberals see the current situation in the world as being unjust, unfair, unequal. And so liberals tend to see that change needs to occur so that we can restore like a better balance to society. Uh, Liberals tend to believe that, or they support government intervention in economic matters. Now, what this means is they see the government as the sole means to be able to fix the inequality in our society. So the fact that we have a huge divide between rich and poor in our nation, it's liberals see the government as the tool to try to fix that. If we look on the conservative side, we see conservatives tend to look to preserve, the way of life that they have it. They believe strongly in the status quo. And what's interesting is that conservatives, and again, I'm going to keep saying tend to because these are not universal principles by any means. Um, in some cases, I can believe one way, and in other cases, I can believe another. But conservatives tend to be very satisfied with the way things are going because they're moderately successful within the world as it is. So they don't want to change things. There's fear in change. They actually oppose the expansion of government. Conservatives see government gaining greater and greater power as kind of a bad thing because ultimately, as some person or some organization or some government gains more power, it's very difficult to get that power back once granted to them. So conservatives really oppose any sort of expansion of the size of the government. Now, liberals, they back government intervention to restore that balance in society. So because government is the only powerful is the only organization that is powerful enough. If we look at the civil rights movement in the 1950s in the United States, what you tend to see is that even though a large number of people in the United States um, saw the civil rights movement as a good thing, the government was really the only organization or only entity that had the power to truly enforce the principles of the Constitution. In this case, it would be equal protection under the law. And so when you have states in the South who were adamantly opposed about, in regards to segregation, or they were actually for segregation, they were opposed to desegregation. And when the Supreme Court case was decided in 1954, Brown versus Topeka Board of Education, which outlawed segregation, the government had to forcibly go into the South and protect, the 9 students from Little Rock 9. They had to protect students in Topeka. Across the nation, government troops had to be brought in, police had to be brought in to protect those kids, to give them the same opportunities. So it's only the government that can intervene. If we leave it up to, and liberals would say, if you leave it up to people, people are always going to choose in their own self-interest. They're not going to choose what's best for the group. They're going to choose what's best for themselves. Now, let's look at conservatives here. Conservatives emphasize self-reliance. And what that means is they kind of look at it, whereas liberals tend to be about the group. I like to I use kind of an analogy. Liberals are, when you fall down, liberals are the type of people who will offer you a hand to help you up. Conservatives, if you fall down, would they might offer you a hand, but they would say, you know what, you need to get up on your own. That's a sign of internal strength to be able to overcome the difficulties that you have in life. So as you can see, conservatives emphasize this idea of self-reliance. I made this money myself. Why should I have to share it with people who are unwilling to get off the couch? We hear this with the healthcare debate. Why should I pay for healthcare for someone who doesn't want to work for a living? Now, that does not take into account, all the real issues with affordable care, because ultimately, if conservatives really looked at it, they would see that their tax money anyway goes to support people who don't have insurance. And so, if they actually agree to affordable care, potentially what we could see is that more people would have insurance and the cost or the taxes would be less. But that's a whole nother argument. The conservatives economically believe in free enterprise. They believe in the spirit of, if you take an econ, then you know what free enterprise is. But the idea that, the individual self-worth, that is the most important thing. So economically, my value is only, it equates to what I'm able to produce. It's not what I'm able to produce as a group, it's what I'm able to produce as an individual. So this free enterprise is, I don't want government restricting my ability to buy and sell things. Take, for example, one of the big arguments is with climate change. And so conservatives would say, we don't need the government coming in and telling us how to run our companies so that we don't pollute or don't create or produce pollution. Conservatives would say, if that company was doing so poorly, then citizens would choose not to buy that product. And if they choose not to buy that product, um, that would force companies to change. Liberals would say, you know what? Companies aren't going to change until they're forced to by the government. Comcast is getting way too big, and ultimately, what we're going to see is Comcast down the line probably broken up by our government because Comcast is going to have a complete monopoly in our country over cable. So you can kind of see, and I don't need to go through all of this, but you can kind of see it's kind of a back and forth thing. But there is some big time problems with this kind of linear model. First of all, you can only recognize one dimension. If we talk about economics, then you're left or you're right. If we talk about um, social issues, again, there's only left or right. And what's interesting is that liberals economically believe in a very strong government and government intervention, but socially they believe that the government should stay out of their business. Whereas conservatives economically believe the government should stay out, but socially they believe the government should go in and kind of regulate, actions of people. Well, there's something called the political compass that kind of took the spectrum but made it into, kind of an XY graph. And I'm no math person, so you'll have to excuse my description of this. But what what these political scientists did is they kind of developed one that allowed you to measure left and right on the economic scale, but also on the social scale. So what does it mean? Authoritarian means strong government. Libertarian means lack of government. Okay. So if we look at the candidates from 2012, we can see that most of the candidates were authoritative. If we go back here, so the economic scale runs here. So economically, they're fairly conservative, that the government should stay out of business. However, socially, we see that the candidates were fairly strong believers that the government should play a role in regulating social issues. The one candidate that was kind of way outfield was Ron Paul, and he was quickly defeated. If we look at the U.S. Congress, blue being Democrats and red being Republicans, we can clearly see that the Senate and the House are both controlled. And actually, I need to update this, but the Senate actually won 4 or 5 more seats. So the Senate, these should all be red now. The Senate is controlled by both the Republicans, and the House is controlled by the Republicans. So some vocabulary you need to know, and you can kind of look through this, but conservative, liberal, centrist means somebody in the middle. Libertarian means no government intervention. Authoritarian means strong government intervention. A populist is somebody who is popular of the people. Barack Obama, for example. A moderate will definitely be in the center, but they tend to be less radical. And apolitical, A means without, so apolitical is without politics. So these are things that you'll probably need to include. Now, I only have about a minute and a half here, but where's the US in the political spectrum? And so what we see is like the 2004 election, we see that like blue is Democrat and red is Republican. George Bush won this, a conservative. We can clearly see that the country looks very conservative here. However, this map is actually doesn't tell the whole story. If we were to change the map and represent the size of the states on the number of voters within that state, we can clearly see that, our country might be a little bit more 50-50. Here's actually red is Republican, blue is Democrat. This is by county. And you'll notice, for example, that the country itself looks overwhelmingly conservative. However, there are large areas, and usually what we see is in large cities, we tend to see a lot more Democrats. That's the cartogram there. Here's the 2008 election where Barack Obama won, and now you see some inroads that Barack Obama made. First of all, Indiana was the first time Indiana had voted Democratic since 1964. He won Florida. He won a couple of western states. He won Virginia and North Carolina. Here's votes by county, and we can clearly see that it's a bigger range. Here's 2004 versus 2008. Here's the 2012 election. Indiana and North Carolina both moved. And with